now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. When we were talking to Jill and Rose at the Perot about hosting here, we wanted to make it inclusive and see who from their staff and their team might be able to talk to us about one of our themes, and we have roots. So they immediately knew that they wanted to bring Drew to the stage. He's been involved in archaeology and done, fieldwork in some really interesting sites. And I guess Dallas is so archaeologically interesting that he came here from Michigan and Pennsylvania.
All of it, yeah.
All over?
Yeah.
To come to Dallas and study the people here. So here he is, Drew Montgomery.
Thank you. All right, how you guys doing? You all right? Think we can do a little bit better than that. How are you guys doing? All right. Relax, that was a little rowdy for my taste, if I'm being honest. This isn't a rock concert, but thank you for the enthusiasm. So Creative Mornings, that sounds fun. We got a lot of cool looking people, a lot of hats. Disproportionate, if you're really thinking about it. Pretty much every popular style represented, so good, good crowd. I know what you guys are thinking, this guy's up here, where have I seen him? I've got a TV set at home, was that it? If you recognize me, you probably recognize me from one of two places. One might be Perot Museum social media. That's where that picture on you guys' left comes from. The other place, I was also Employee of the Month at Aeropostale in June 2009, okay? So hopefully that's making some connections for people. I see quite a few heads nodding. Appreciate you being here again. So Perot Museum social media, if that's it, go ahead and follow us. If not, it was just exemplary folding about 11 years ago. So, in all seriousness, oh shucks. What do I do? My title is the Science Communication and Outreach Fellow for the Center for the Exploration of the Human Journey at the Perot Museum of Nature and Science. And I love that title because it's quick, it's to the point. There's not 7 or 8 extra words in there. It just kind of lets you know what I do. So again, it's like elegant in its simplicity. So what do I do? Science communication. Who's heard that word before? Or those 2 words? Good? Okay, every single one of you. Good. So science communication, it's like the most jargony and the most self-explanatory thing ever. Essentially, we just take scientific concepts, whatever they are, difficult concepts, scientific research, and we make it digestible and interesting in a number of different ways to any different audience. So that could be through museum exhibits. Gosh darn it, if we don't have a lot of creative people here, maybe it's through the things that you do, podcasts, whatever else people in hats do. Just interesting, cool things. So as the Science Communication Fellow, it's my job to take the anthropological research that we do at the Perot Museum, our colleagues do, friends, randos, whoever it is, and I just take it to as broad of an audience as possible. So I talk and write to kids, adults, students, teachers, the general public, companies, LeBron James, if he was around, why not involve him in a discussion? He's not here today, but just anybody if LeBron was around. Cool, so yeah, the Center for the Exploration of the Human Journey. I'll go ahead and read that mission statement. Our mission is to explore the human journey, to communicate the science and stories around our shared humanity, and to act as a catalyst for education and dialogue. Follow us at Perot Museum CHJ. So this is a science communication department that is focused on all things human, all sciences and humanities, I suppose, that involve humans. So that's anthropology, archaeology, history, really anything that that tells our shared story. And a lot of people often ask about that little part at the end, act as a catalyst for education and dialogue. So in the exhibit behind us, there's a heavy human evolution component. There's a heavy human evolution component with pretty much everything we do. We recognize that we're in Texas, and that's part of our mission as well. Not everybody loves talking about that here. That's totally cool. We really do, but we try to do it in the most respectful, diplomatic, inclusive way possible. So that's absolutely part of our mission, and if people don't want to talk about it at all, that's totally cool too. There's probably something else in the human journey that we can interest them with. The flag depiction of South Africa, your bottom left, we have a partnership with the University of the Witwatersrand, or Wits University in Johannesburg. They're the ones that curate the fossils that are right behind me that we're going to talk about in a few slides. They're the ones that loaned them to us. The fossils are actually owned by the people of South Africa, but that partnership is really key to everything we do. So we're appreciative. It's really good. Teaching anthropology. So I started teaching anthropology, I did for the very first time about 7 years ago, because I'm 21, and I was like a boy genius. It was my first year in graduate school. I had an undergraduate class, Introduction to Archaeology, 20 students, and I was, to be honest, that's like something I wanted to do my whole life. I was really excited for it. I did everything you would need to prepare. I wrote out the lectures, I practiced them, I bought like a shoulder bag, all the stuff that professors do to get ready for this class. And I get into the class, and I say to everybody, I'm like, all right, we're gonna go around in a circle. We're gonna get to know each other. I wanna know your name, something you like to do, and I wanna know why you decided to take this class. So we get to the first person in the class, and she's like, hey, Tiffany, Pi-Phi isn't something I do, it's something I am. And I was like, okay, aggressive, but thank you for sharing that part. And she says, honestly, I took this class because it satisfied a lot of pillars. And pillars, if you're familiar with SMU, they're like the foundational requirements. Everybody's got to take them. And I'm like, thank you, Tiff. Can I call you Tiff? I could. Teaching's going great. That's fine. Thank you for your honesty. Get to the next student. And she, similar answers for the first two. And she says, you know what? I'm with Tiff. Everybody calls her Tiff now. I took this class because it satisfied a lot of pillars. Thanks. Thank you for being honest. 18 more students in the class, each student with less enthusiasm than the one before them, says they took the class because it satisfied a lot of pillars, till we get all the way to the slouching kid in the back, and he just goes, Steve, pillars. Appreciate it. Thank you. So, next class, next semester, exact same situation, but I learned, and I was like, for this, you can't say that you took the class because it satisfied a lot of pillars. You got to come up with something else. First person in the class, same thing. I took this class because it sounded interesting. You're a liar, but thank you for pretending. Next person, I took this class because it sounded interesting. 18 more freaking students. Same response, less enthusiasm than the one before, till we get all the way to the kid in the back, and he just goes, Steve, interesting. And I'm like, what are you even doing back? He was like, I failed, and I was like, you're off to a similar start, if we're being honest. So, as an anthropologist, that's the point where you realize that no one cares about you or your little hobby. But I think that everybody should. And you shouldn't care about anthropology necessarily for the exact things it teaches you or the directly transferable skills. Those are great if you're in certain industries, but you should care about anthropology because of the way that it makes you think. It's kind of one of those, what are you going to do with that majors? That's what people will ask. If anybody else was a social science major, you probably have gotten that. And I think that's for two reasons. One, I think that people associate archaeology training in college with things they see on TV, which really isn't what we learn. And then secondly, if we're talking about directly transferable skills to most companies, maybe they have a point, okay? But nothing is really directly transferable. Everything's kind of foundational until you get to a certain point. But if they're just talking about that, then they certainly have a point. None of you have ever gone into the office and your boss is like, I don't know what it is, but this client will only communicate in hieroglyphics. It's been a nightmare. We asked Bander GJ, he sent a picture of a serpent. We need an archaeologist. That's never happened. It hasn't even happened to me, and I'm an archaeologist. So I get that. But again, it's not for those direct skills that you think we have, it's for the way that it makes you think. So what I hope to do today, and I realize that you guys all have your thing going, but I hope that you decide to engage in anthropology on some level. There's a lot of different ways to do that. You can read about another culture, or anthropology book, or just read about people that you perceive to be from a different place than you. Visit a museum. Gosh darn it if I don't have an idea about that. Travel, visit archaeological sites, visit places of historical and cultural importance. Another key one. And then finally, the hardest, easiest, most important one, exercise an anthropological approach. And we're going to learn all about that. Okay, who knows what anthropology is? Do you want to give it a shot?
It's the study of human cultures, past and present.
Yeah, I was worried you were going to say it's a great place to get that new spring romper. You know what I mean? Because it's that too. Yes. So anthropology is the study of people. And I'm going to kind of use anthropology and archaeology interchangeably a little bit. But just understand real quick, anthropology is the overarching discipline. It's the study of people. There are 4 subdisciplines. Cultural anthropology generally excuse my French. Cultural anthropology, generally associated with people in the present, but not always. Archaeology, generally associated with people in the past, but not always. Biological anthropology, biological aspects of humanity. That includes things like human evolution, forensic anthropology, and such. Linguistic anthropology, study of languages. Archaeology is my specialty, what I'll generally be talking about. That's the study of the past through material remains. If we're talking about archaeology, it's almost just as important to talk about what it's not. Biggest misconception about archaeology is that we study dinosaurs. We don't. The amount of times I've told somebody that I'm an archaeologist and they said, "You're an archaeologist, you must know everything there is to know about dinosaurs." People that know everything there is to know about dinosaurs are not called archaeologists. They're called toddlers. Occasionally, those people grow up to become paleontologists. So don't get that one confused. Hat and whip, don't own one. I own a hat, but more like those hats, not like that hat. So archaeology has kind of earned this reputation in the media as an adventure sport, and it's really not what it's about. There are adventurous components to it. If the things you're trying to find or the information you're trying to get is in a difficult to reach place, then it's difficult to get there, and that might be a cool story. But it's about the information, it's not about the adventure. It's nothing like Indiana Jones, nothing like Tomb Raider. If you have time to go to the exhibit behind me, the story of how they found those things is quite adventurous. But they didn't do it for the caving, they did it because the fossils were in the cave. So sometimes your data is in a basement, or an attic, or the middle of a building. It might not always be in something that's very difficult to find. And then all the way on my left, aliens. I don't know where, thanks Joe Rogan and everybody else that's talking about this. Keep doing that. I don't know where that came from, but if you ever seen Ancient Aliens or anything like that, there's a lot of TV shows about how aliens might have built the pyramids, built stuff like that. It's garbage trash. Don't consume it. All right, so that's what we don't do. And I understand you study people. That's pretty broad. What are some examples of things that you might do? So here are just some examples. This might represent a tiny, tiny portion of what archaeologists could do. So archaeologists might learn about past religions and belief systems, might try to reconstruct those. They might study subsistence strategies. How did people eat? How did they trade? How did they hunt? How did they gather? How did they get along? Very interesting thing to study. Sources and modes of conflict. Why did why did groups come to war? What caused that? Similar to power relationships, how did individuals gain power in certain societies? How did groups gain power? Factions, states? Are there similarities throughout the world? What can we tell about humanity? And finally, the rise of complexity, or probably better phrased, is cultural change over time. How do, in certain areas of the world, we see mostly hunting and gathering societies that eventually turned into states? And again, turned into is maybe not the right word, but what's the impetus for what we call cultural complexity? And overall, archaeologists are in every corner of the globe asking thousands of questions, trying to figure out why we are the way that we are. That's the thing that we're trying to do. And if you do this, what you realize pretty quickly is that if you look at all the diversity in the entire world, all of the difference, even though that's pretty vast, the things that make us more similar are giant. Despite our vast diversity, we are peculiarly similar, much more. And if you can learn that about the world, you'll become a little bit more of an effective worker or family member or whatever it is. To be a truly good anthropologist, you have to practice very, very radical empathy. You can't judge another culture from your perspective. You have to put yourself in the perspective of those people and just look at it from there. You don't have to support everything, but you can understand it. And if you learn to truly be understanding, you'll learn to be empathic, you'll learn to be tolerant, and that will spill beautifully into the rest of your life. So that can be at work. It's a lot easier to come to terms with someone or figure out a solution if you truly understand where they are on the other side of the table and all the little strings attached to them that made them that way. And it can be really, really small. You know, your roommate might not ruin your day because of a comment. You might just recognize that they're under stress. You don't have to be like this all the time. Nobody's perfect. But if you can exercise this empathy just a little bit of the time, you're going to be a little bit happier, and that's great. So again, hardest, easiest, but most important thing about anthropology. So for the rest of the time, I want to talk a little bit about my specialty within archaeology. That's community archaeology. Anybody heard of community archaeology? Yeah. It's essentially archaeology for and by the people, if you were to Wikipedia that right now. But what does that actually mean? And community archaeology generally manifests itself in two ways. One, heavy outreach component. That just means that the archaeologists are doing education throughout the project. Two, involvement, decision-making, work by the descendant communities. So if you're digging in an area, those descendants should be involved in the process. Why do we think that's important? Their history, their story, absolutely. And I can only really speak for Mexico and Belize because those are the only places that I've worked significantly. But there's a history of white Western scholars coming into an area, taking things that are very, very important, leaving and never talking to anyone in the community. I worked on a community archaeology project in the central Yucatan in Mexico. I have a very good friend, he's actually not pictured there. His name's Guadalupe, and he said the only thing he remembers about archaeology is about 15 years ago. A group of guys came into the town, dug in all sorts of places that they didn't really want them digging, took all of those treasures of their heritage, took them to a lab, maybe in Mexico City or somewhere else, and the only time they ever saw them was when they were digging, or this one guy would do karate on the soccer field at the very end of each day. And that's a really bad look. Karate? Was it after his swim lesson? Come on, that's not what we want. And I mean, cultural pillage is way worse, but the karate thing just like pissed me right off. So that's why we do it, and we'll talk about a few strategies for community archaeology and participation. The biggest one, like we said, local participation. If you have a descendant community, they should be excavating, if they want. They should be working in the lab. High school students should have internships. Everybody that's catering for you, doing logistics, they should all be local. They should all be part of it. They should be working if they want, and they should be paid pretty well. Celebrate heritage. This can be done through things like building a museum, doing pop-up exhibits, bleeds into the next point, doing public outreach and education. So as you're learning things about this ancient culture, you should be working with the modern culture to help them inform their friends and families. And then finally, just hang out. Be part of the community in more ways than in a professional way. So when I was in Mexico for 4 months, and I spent a lot of time excavating. I spent a lot of time doing education. I spent a ton of time drinking, because that's what they were doing. And that's part of the job. But I mean, I spent time in bars, birthday parties, my friends' daughters and nieces, quinceañeras, getting beat up pretty bad in soccer, doing a little better in volleyball. But just being part of the community, that's a really big part of it. And some of my really good friends I still keep in touch with in the Yucatan. My one friend Guadalupe that I mentioned, he's very religious and very dramatic. And on my very last day of work, and excuse me if you speak Spanish, my accent is horrendous, but he pulls me aside, he goes, Cruz. That's what they called me. Cruz, vamos a reunirse otra vez en el cielo. Which means, Drew, we'll meet each other once again in heaven. And I was like, yeah. I'm also coming down in March. I don't know what your work schedule is. And he was like, yeah, if I could just check with my boss, that'd be totally cool. Love to grab one. And actually, I'm seeing him in March. So that's a key component. All right, so the whole thesis of this thing was to get you to engage with anthropology in some way. And gosh darn it if we don't have the opportunity for you. It's right behind me. Can you even believe that? Okay, not a lot of reaction. So, origins, fossils from the cradle of humankind. What a great exhibit. Everyone that's ever been has said that it's the greatest thing that's ever happened, except for like one person. And it's just right behind me in this museum. No, in all seriousness, we have two hominid skeletons that are authentic fossils. So the actual fossils, and if you know anything about this, you know that's exceptionally rare. They've never left South Africa for display purposes, and they probably never will again. Again, that's just not something that happens. And they're not going on a big tour after this. They're not going Dallas, Houston, LA, Chicago, Richardson. They're just going right back to Johannesburg. So this is your chance. It's here till March 22nd. And I'll spend just a minute or Drew talking about each of the specimens. First one, this handsome son of a gun. Australopithecus SEDIBA, a 2 million year old Australopithecine. Really, really beautiful looking fossils. Discovered in 2008 or 9, I don't remember, by actually a 9-year-old boy. So a pretty cool story to go along with it. And again, just a really, really beautiful thing to look at. Homo naledi, the famous one. Homo naledi is about a 250 to 300,000 year old specimen, also from the same area in South Africa, discovered in 2013. Really, really cool story of how it was discovered, and also a really, really interesting and mysterious way that it was deposited. So really cool. We really do hope that at some point you take the time to bring your friends to Origins Fossils from the Cradle of Humankind. If you also want to engage with South African history and archaeology, we have other things on the rest of the floors. So real quick, we have some pieces from a South African fashion designer on the second floor, along with a statue that was gifted to George W. Bush by Nelson Mandela. Third floor, we have some, damn it, I keep doing that. Third floor, we have some rock art from the Kalahari San, 1,500 to 3,000 years old. And then on the fourth floor, we have a Thrinaxodon. I don't know what that is, but it's on the fourth floor. So yeah, we hope you engage with anthropology. It would be great if you wanted to see some of the things, the South African components that we have in the museum. That would make us really proud. Otherwise, thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
With your studies of anthropology and archaeology, why are we the way we are?
Jeez. Man, give me 6 years to figure that out.
Okay.
No, I don't know. Why are we the way we are? I should have thought, how do you not think of an answer to that? Man.
All you've studied.
Man. No, I really don't know. That's a good question.
6
Why are we?
years. Cielo.
Yep. Man, good question. I have no way to handle that. A million different factors. Everything, other people, the environment, decisions, relationships. Now it's like a brainstorm. Yeah, man, stumped on the first one. This will be fun.
Who does one talk to about bringing an exhibit to the Perot?
Our vice president of exhibits handles all of that. Yeah, that was easier.
When you first realized that this was a career you were interested in, did you know which parts of the world you wanted to study, or is that something where it was more dictated by the program or the fellowship or the place where you ended up? Because obviously you speak Spanish. I don't know if you're fluent or if that was something that came after. I'm just kind of curious about how.
Sure. Yeah, I decided that I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was 14 or 15. My parents took us on a vacation to Mexico, and we spent a day off the resort at Chichen Itza, really, really big, famous archaeological site. And from there, I was just trying to figure out how you study it. And I realized that anthropologists, not historians, generally study the Maya, learned Spanish or a little bit of Spanish at work. And you know, if it was a different vacation, I very well could see myself in other parts of the world. There's a lot of places that interest me, but after that trip, it was all Maya. Anybody else? Yeah.
When you go to Central America or Belize, are you there at their request? You talked about how important it was for them to be super involved. I mean, this is their heritage. Are you there at their request, or what does that relate to?
No, not explicitly. at their request. The way that it worked among the most recent project I was on, researchers in North Carolina were looking for a project, so they met with actually 30 communities in the Yucatan to see who was most interested, who would think that they would benefit from some kind of work like that. And they ultimately decided on a little village called Tacabo because they were very interested. They wanted to train people up on archaeology so they could go work in Cancun and stuff like that. And I imagine most projects are like that. Probably American researchers looking for a project, meeting with communities, and figuring out what's the best match for them. Yeah.
Could you discuss maybe your understanding that the difference between, or not the difference between art and archaeology, and where that line is drawn?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know much about the interpretation of art and how art historians study, but I can definitely tell you that there's probably quite a lot of overlap. We use physical objects. I imagine artists use physical objects as well. In the Maya area, it would be, reliefs and paintings and stuff like that. So a lot of times, archaeologists will have art historians on the project to get some really nitty-gritty interpretation that then they can use to put together the bigger picture about these people. So some really famous Mayanists are trained exclusively in art history, and they probably don't excavate at all. So especially in Mesoamerica, it's really quite a lot of overlap. Yes?
You mentioned that white guys go into these villages and steal stuff and never go back. What can we do to support, like as the general public, to support like good archaeological work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you can support any sort of archaeology, if it's a community archaeology project, that's much better. You can actually go to some of these places and visit. They don't mind that. If you're ever in Cancun, the village is called Tacabo. They have an archaeology museum, and it's quite hard to get into, but they actually love when people come and see what they're about. So you can do little things like that. Hopefully that trend of Western scholars just coming in, kind of taking things, and hopefully that's just going away with criticism within the field. But anything that says community or public archaeology is probably a little bit better bet.
So kind of my question was related, which was kind of piggybacking off of this sort of trend of Western scholars coming in. Particularly, we think of like Great Britain coming into like Egypt and things like that, and then I know there's like a conflict of ownership. So when you're typically partnering with the government to uncover, so you might have like American archaeologists coming into a foreign country and they're partnering with the government. How is ownership typically handled? So obviously, like in the South Africa version, or example, they're loaning them out. How does that kind of ownership typically work?
Yeah, so definitely depends quite a bit on the country. South Africa, the people own the objects. The university curates them, and the government. In Mexico, the government owns all the land, and they own everything that's in the land, I think. So at this point, not a lot is going to leave Mexico, maybe nothing. So if it is curated anywhere, it's probably curated either locally or in a big town like Merida or Mexico City. But as far as who owns it, it's just never us. It might be the government, it might be the people, it might be a university that's curating it. But for the case of Mexico, everything stays.
But the exchange is typically, I guess, like an agreement of we'd like to be able to bring this on a tour or bring this into a museum for a limited period of time to share.
Yeah, that would be a fair thing. In this case, in South Africa, it's an effort to celebrate South Africa's heritage beyond Africa. So that's why it's here. Many of the things that you might see, like in the British Museum, sorry to just stomp on them, but those were not taken in fair context. So things that are coming out now are really supposed to stay. Yeah.
So you knew you wanted to be an archaeologist from the age you were 14. When did you know you wanted to be a comedian?
Just after this comment. So 2 weeks notice.
You may have mentioned this, I was slightly distracted. So you spent a lot of time in Central Mexico and Belize. Can you highlight some of the findings that you found?
Yeah, I haven't really, I don't think too many, well, probably some people, but I haven't found a whole lot of things that would make you jump out of your seat. The goal of the project in Mexico was to understand subsistence strategies at 3 key phases. So before the Spanish conquest, right after, and then in the colonial period. Well, in the colonial period. So most of the stuff we were finding are ceramics, stone tools, botanical remains, probably not really anything that would make you really excited. In Belize, I found a piece of jade in a burial, a skeleton's mouth, which was pretty interesting, in a pyramid. So that was one where actually was a really, really cool moment. But most of the findings are things that contribute to a broader question over time. So it's not necessarily finding a piece that answers a question. It's finding literally thousands of things, analyzing them, looking at trends, and then seeing if you can make some headway. Yeah?
When an anthropologist works in a corporate setting, what kind of job title do they have?
Long ones. There's a lot of ways that anthropology can be applied. Our chief evaluator or director of evaluation is a cultural anthropologist. So she studies a lot of our experiences and how people are engaging with them from a cultural or sociological perspective. That's a really popular way for anthropologists to be in industry. I'm a science communicator. My boss, I suppose, is director of the center and research archaeologist. So she does academic research and she also builds science communication initiatives. There's quite a lot of ways to use the skills, I think. Yeah.
You spoke about empathy and trying to understand the next person,
Mm-hmm.
being in their shoes. What advice could you give to us as far as your understanding and learning of that?
Sure. I think just learn as much as possible about people that you perceive as different or from a different place than you. I think once you really get a better sense of everyone, that's when the empathy starts to kick in. Yeah.
Having the certain job that you have and working for the Perot family, I didn't know if you got to have certain opportunities. I know that they own a piece of property in Denton where Sam Bass is known to have hid, and there is like folklore about that's where like a ton of treasure is buried.
Oh.
I mean, now so I don't know if you have ever been allowed to, and I know several of their properties have like historical aspects to them, so if you have ever had the opportunity to have access to them.
No, right now we're really focused on South Africa, the research in South Africa. And once the exhibit leaves, we probably will take a little bit of a local spin, but we'll probably look at some really interesting things right here in Dallas, and not just archaeology, but also in Dallas local history. But right now it's all South Africa. Yeah?
As you present to kids, what are some of your favorite questions you get?
How old are you? So I started going gray when I was like 6, and I had to do a program with this guy, and he turned 75 the same day I turned 24. And he was like, how old do you think we are? And they were like, I think Mr. Norm is 46, and Mr. Drew's got to be 45. And I was like, cool. No, I mean, they ask a lot of good questions. They ask about the process. And I think probably the best thing is when we can get them understanding about this whole empathy thing and perspective from a very young age, because it's a little bit easier at that point. They don't see a lot of the divisions that we do. So those are probably the best questions. Yeah?
Have you seen any data, I don't know if the museum's doing any data, on the origins exhibit? You know how you mentioned you're in Texas, and there's a lot of people who may, that's not comfortable for them. Has there been any data collected or to show any shifts in mindset or?
Yeah, so I don't know if I can speak about the analysis quite yet because the exhibit's still here, but I can tell you anecdotally, we do have quite a lot of people coming in that are uncomfortable with it. And that's totally cool. And what I find most of the time with either myself or talking to the engagement specialists is that people generally aren't coming in for a fight. They're coming in just to understand. So, and that makes it a whole lot easier. But you get a lot of people saying things like, look, I don't know how I feel about this. I was raised to believe a different thing. That's totally cool. And you may talk to them about it, talk about the ways that we figure these things out. And if by the end, we're not trying to change any minds. We're just trying to help them appreciate this if they want to. And again, if they don't ever want to, then there's tons of great stuff about South Africa upstairs. So yeah, anecdotally, yeah, it does happen, but the goal is more to build a bridge and make people comfortable talking about it. Yes, it's not the same question, is it?
No. Thousands of years from now.
Man, this is going to be just as hard.
What will archaeologists and anthropologists be saying about the people of Dallas?
Man, yeah.
He's good. He can do it.
Is that about what the time we have? Or,
It's only 5 minutes left.
No, it is interesting. I mean, there won't be a whole lot of need for excavation because we take care of all of that by recording everything on social media and everything. But no, it'll be really interesting. And even like 100 years, maybe there just won't be archaeologists. Maybe there'll just be people that creep through tweets like you wouldn't believe. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see even how the field evolves in the next few years. And how we can use other records to teach us about the past. Yeah?
Is there ever any, and this might sound silly, is there any ever concern of like running out of, at some point down the line, running out of artifacts to uncover, or is the idea just there's so much buried so deep that like there's always something to discover?
Yeah, there's certainly always something to discover. We'll never run out of things to find. Probably the issue now is there are so many things that are just sitting in museum collections, sitting in basements and attics. But people like to excavate. They like to go find things. But many archaeologists could have a wonderful career just by analyzing things that have already been found and haven't been looked at for certain questions. So I would actually like to see a little bit of a shift towards that, towards using collections that are already available. Mm-hmm.
I guess, and then to one more time, is there concern with the way that the world is changing right now on a climate basis that might be threatened? Is that a concern at all, or is that just because it's buried so deep? A lot of
oh yeah, no, that is a tremendous concern. A lot of sites are coastal. A lot of sites are getting washed away. Okay. Yeah, that's a concern in the United States, in the northwest of Scotland. A lot of sites are being washed away. Yeah, we're probably already losing things. Yeah.
All right, can we thank Drew with a big round of applause?